Okay, so I just had a very interesting um, dream, very convoluted dream. This is Jonathan Zapp of zapporacle.com, by the way, that I thought might be of interest to others because it led to some strange ideation afterward and sort of cognitive sleep state that then continued after I was fully awake and with some possible paranormal effects. And so the dream begins it starts as a kind of anxiety dream of a very familiar type. I call these, they're common in a lot of people. I call them failure of performance dreams. And even though I haven't been a teacher since 1995, and most of them I'm back teaching again, and I'm like late for like the first class of the year and thinking how the department chairman is going to react to that and this kind of thing. But sometimes I'm the one, and this is actually increased lately, even as I'm like at a completely improbable age, where I am back at school. And but this dream was, but it usually there's no thought about the age weirdness of my being back in school. But in this dream, I was aware of myself as an almost 68-year-old person, and a little bit self-conscious about that, and I'm like kind of feeling disheveled, and I have like shopping bags with me, and I kind of feel like an eccentric old person who's unsure how I'm going to fit in with these incoming freshmen, because it's supposed to be freshman orientation, and we're supposed to have some kind of team activity between me and like the group of other freshmen that are going through orientation together. But I'm hopelessly confused about the where and when. This is a common feature of these dreams. Like, I don't know my schedule. I often want to go to like the office and find out what's my schedule. Like, where am I supposed to be? I don't know the room number. I don't know the place. And so it's like that. And when I ask like different school administrators or teachers walking around, they're like, yeah, we don't know either, but you should have been there 15 minutes ago. Like, so it's this kind of like anxious feeling. But at the same time, I know what the team activity is supposed to be, which is to create a comedy skit together. And I'm thinking like, well, despite the age difference, I could contribute a lot to that. I do know something about comedy skits. And and actually, while I'm walking around totally confused on this college campus, trying to get myself to find out where I'm supposed to go, with the ratcheting up anxiety of knowing I'm like later and later. At one point, I even run into, I'm thinking about what skit I would like to suggest. And at one point, I even run into a college professor who looks sort of like the college professorial version of John Wooders, dressed in a suit and stuff. And I like explain some of it to him. And eventually, and I'm thinking more and more about the skit, and eventually that just turns into cognitive sleep state where I may be vaguely aware that I'm no longer in the dream, but I'm still thinking about the skit. It's not quite clear, and eventually I fully wake up and continue to have some thoughts about it. So the premise of the skit is that there is a high budget Hollywood movie that's going to be made that's called The Valley of the Northern Stars. Why it has that name, no one knows. The movie is not really what's important or what it's about. But what is important is that it takes place at the NYU Film School. I did go to NYU, but not to the film school. And there is this gay kid who's like the protagonist, and there is an ambitious young up-and-coming movie director who gives a talk at the school because he presumes that he's not just in the running, but is almost certain to be the director of this movie called The Valley of the Northern Stars. And this kid watches this guy in an auditorium speak, and he's kind of a handsome, charismatic guy. I visualized him as like a young Kevin Bacon for whatever reason. And but this kid is kind of seeing through him a bit, seeing that he's really quite an egoist, but he's still kind of like interested. And as it turns out, the ambitious young director does not get to be the director, but as some kind of like pride humiliating, consolation, but that he's still going to take. He's going to be the one to do a video documentary on the making of the movie, The Valley of the Northern Stars. And he ends up recruiting NYU film students to help with that. And this kid is one of them. And now this ambitious young director who's insulted by this, consolation he got, is extremely rude and demanding and arrogant. He turns out to be a total dick. The kid totally hates him at this point, and he begins surreptitiously making his own film, because now, even with just a phone, you can record in 4K and whatnot. And he's going to call that film The Making of The Valley of the Northern Stars. And he gets more and more into it, and it's kind of like an expose of Hollywood egos and the narcissism of celebrity culture and the ruthlessness of it, and it kind of becomes more and more commentary on the whole present era. And then what happens is the movie, The Valley of the Northern Stars, is a total bomb. And so nobody even watches the making of The Valley of the Northern Stars. But this kid's film becomes a huge hit. However, the movie that would be about that would not be that film, because we have to see this kid from an outside point of view. And so that film that I start increasingly thinking about as I'm drifting into cognitive sleep space, where you're still dreaming, but you're more, the surrounding scenario tends to fade away and you're thinking more. And I'm very used to that liminal place. It's a light stage of sleep. And that film is going to be called The Making of The Valley of the Northern Stars. And I'm thinking, this really sounds like a Wes Anderson film. I could pitch this film to Wes Anderson and maybe make some money doing that. But then I realized, but Wes Anderson, I think his last film, which I didn't see, I like Wes Anderson films a lot, but I hear his last film got really bombed in reviews and stuff. So this guy's probably at the tail end of his career. And so if he gets to do this film, the budgeting is going to be really tight, and he's probably going to lowball me with a low six figures offer for the treatment. And I'm not sure if I really want to work with Wes Anderson at that point, because do I want this giant ego hanging around my neck? He's not going to give me any creative control. I'll be lucky if I get an executive producer credit, which everyone knows is completely meaningless. It's a vanity thing. And, if there was some other director, more up and coming, and able to handle a surreal, multi-layered film, maybe I would get into seven figures. But then I kind of realized I'm kind of busy. I've got on deadlines of two different books. I don't know if I have the time to figure out how to pitch that to some new director. So maybe this film won't even get made. In fact, then I start to realize I'm sort of starting to remote view the future as I'm waking up, that what's actually going to happen is that this video, the one that you're watching right now, is going to be used as the start of a future inevitable documentary about me. Now, I really don't have any interest in somebody making a documentary about me. It's bound to happen sooner or later. I'm really just too humble and past my ego to be even interested in such a project. But then what I start to realize as I'm kind of remote viewing the future of that documentary is that it's going to be called Zap Force One, which is the name I've given to my Sprinter van that I live out of when I travel, sometimes 25% of the year. And then I realized that because of this opening premise, that inevitably somebody thinking they're being clever and ironic will do another documentary called The Making of Zap Force 1. And I start trying to like remote view the world line of the person, the documentarian who will do that documentary, who I don't really like. He's just like thinks he's very clever. He's like a wannabe Wes Anderson type, I guess. And I start to realize that he thinks it's his idea, but that he's actually kind of a puppet who's being mind pressured by shadowy paranormal agents that are manipulating him into doing that ironic documentary called The Making of Zap Force 1. And when I start trying to look into the shadows to see who those agents are, at first I think it's either or, but then I realize it's both. It's some kind of a dark, probably Gen Alpha mutant at this point, because this is in the future, who has is kind of a trickster and has a lot of paranormal abilities and is mind pressuring this director. But there's also a super AGI that, for some completely different agenda, is also mind pressuring this guy, and that it's possible that both of these agents, even though they don't exist yet, maybe the Gen Alpha one hasn't even been born yet, are also using mind pressure to seed my dreams and for their own purposes. But because their agendas are different, it's really distorting my dreams. And so the documentary that I really want to see get made is the powers behind the making of Zap Force 1.